Hey guys, I'm back to continue some of the conversations that I have started on my channel with my previous videos. I apologize if I'm a little low energy today. Miss Flo is right around the corner and I'm feeling a little tired, but I think it is fitting with the theme today to just kind of like let myself be as I am, because I want to talk about things around aging, body image, beauty standards, and how ever present that theme, those topics are for so many of us. And as per usual, I want to talk about it very gently and very compassionately and kind of open the door into looking at some angles that we sometimes brush past a little quickly, I think. And with this topic, I also want to bring in the film Death Becomes Her with Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, because I just feel like it's a perfect encapsulation of so many of these themes. And what I really appreciate about that movie is, like all great comedies, it hits on something very, very real. It hits on real pains, real anxieties, real sources of grief for so many people. And I think, presents them in an exaggerated way, but also in a way that can be quite incisive and accurate. And it is very witty and very funny, but it also doesn't take away from the seriousness of what it's talking about, and balances it out really well while still making it very digestible and approachable. And I think that's one of my favorite ways to talk about heavier things in life, is just, still have a life raft to float above things rather than completely submerge yourself, And, I guess there's a lot to be said, about how difficult it can be to have compassion for ourselves and each other when it comes to these themes. I've noticed, for a long time, I noticed this when I was a kid, I noticed it when I was a teenager, I'm noticing it now in my adulthood, that there is so much harshness that people can have towards themselves and towards other people. And it's not just about, a harshness in, criticizing the way that they look or the way that other people look, but I think we can also have a harshness in our disappointment with ourselves and with other people and how they're dealing with that pain. And it's kind of like, it's two things kind of in relationship with each other that I want to talk about in this video. And kind of deepen the context a bit, because as per usual, when it comes to things like beauty standards and body image and all these things that affect everybody, but especially I think, we tend to talk about these things in the context of women. These issues always get treated as surface level, as superficial, as frivolous issues, when really I think they're connected to things that are very, very real and very deep and understandable sources of pain for a lot of people. And I think, naturally with these kinds of topics, when you're thinking about aging and you're thinking about beauty standards, I think about death, and I think about loss, and I think about unexpected changes, which to me, that's what it brings up for me. I also think there's naturally a component of like safety and love and acceptance that's at play here that is also a part of the tapestry of this conversation. But I want to spend a lot of time talking about grief. I want to spend some time talking about our discomfort with grief, with each other's grief. And I've mentioned this before in other videos that I have CPTSD, and I have a pretty severe trauma history. I went through a pretty big traumatic event like right at the start of my adulthood. And most of my 20s have been spent healing or trying to manage some pretty extreme symptoms, and I didn't get to have the young adult experience that I thought I was gonna have. And I am, still lucky. I'm still very young. I'm only 27 as I'm making this video, so I'm not trying to make it sound like life has passed me by for good or anything, but I have, also lost many years to a pretty intense process. And the fact of the matter is, I didn't know that this was a type of loss that you could go through. When I was younger, full disclosure, I do think I felt sometimes confusion and a kind of flippancy towards people who were worried about aging, because I always felt, and I still feel this way, okay, I always felt like aging is a gift, and I always felt like it's such a beautiful thing to gain the wisdom of a life well lived, and to see that in a person, people always mention smile lines, and to me, even wrinkles, like even, all of these things that people tend to have a lot of disgust and disdain towards. When I look at a person and I can see the life that they've lived, and I can see the spirit of them through their eyes, that to me is like the whole point. It's such a beautiful thing, and it's always so reassuring to see older people who have stayed true to themselves and found meaning in things and weathered storms and come out the other side, right? And I always felt, you should, do your best to embrace who you are, and it's a beautiful thing to be who you are, and there is no one else like you, and you are, the only you, and all of those cliches that we say that are true. I really bought into those ideas, and I didn't understand why so many people had so much anxiety and so much fear, and again, that harshness towards themselves and others. I just didn't understand it. And through the past 8 years or so, as I've been in the throes of my CPTSD, and I've been, like I said, dealing with some pretty intense stuff, I think I understood something in a way that I didn't before. Like, I have this context now for what that type of loss is like, and the fact that, there isn't actually always a logical time frame. I feel emotional talking about this. I'm trying not to cry. Not that there's anything wrong with crying about it. See, I said my period's on its way. Anyway, I think I understand that a little bit differently now, that there isn't always a logical time frame to certain losses that you go through and the impact that it can have, and the way that it does change, the way that you think about life. And even though somebody like me, I still hopefully have a lot of time, and I'm I still have years to enjoy myself, I understand now what it feels like to be like knocked off of that balance beam in such an abrupt way, and how that can make you want to hold on really tightly, and the way that it can make you feel afraid of losing anything, and afraid of things changing in a way where it's hard to keep up, and I think that everyone experiences a version of that, as you get older. The world is always changing. There's always a new set of young people who have lingo that you're like, I don't understand what any of that means, and I'm not in that loop anymore. And it's weird because Like I said, I'm only 27, so I'm still very young, and I've only just kind of exited that like epicenter of, I don't know, um, the target of mainstream media, I think, is usually like teenagers, for the most part, and like people in their early 20s. And I've only just kind of exited that and been like looking at it like, I don't really get this anymore. I'm not really a part of that group anymore. And I'm like, entering I'm in my later 20s and entering my further adulthood. And life has taken on different dimensions, and there are things that have been cracked open. I think I have this insight into deeper grief, and also the way that impacts your joy. That not only does it, make your joy fuller, but I think that something people don't always talk about is the way that joy can, in a funny way, also bring up more heartbreak, because there's this feeling of, I couldn't experience this joy before, or it's been so long since I've experienced this joy, that, our emotions as we age, especially when we go through hardships, get more complex. It is like that, that scene in Inside Out where there's that marble that's like sad and happy, I think there's just so much more, to what on the surface can sometimes look like a fear of aging, or a fear of not being beautiful, or not fitting a certain beauty standard. And I wonder why we never really talk about that part. And it feels like a loss to me, because I think there could be so much potential for connectivity and healing and kindness amongst each other, and the ways that we can hold each other in that, because I think that we all get it. I think that we're all experiencing some version of that. And we could be that tenderness for each other, but sometimes we choose not to. And I think that that's room that we have to grow into, And it, to pull it back to Death Becomes Her, this is a film that, it's about two women's, like, their friendship with each other. And even though there's a man in the story, he's sort of, I don't know, kind of a piece of the puzzle that's really about the two women, played by Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn. It's really about them and their sense of belonging within themselves, and how they see that mirrored in each other through their friendship, that like both of them really poke at each other, and they have a tremendous amount of resentment and jealousy and competition with each other, that they both can poke at each other's deepest insecurities and their deepest fears, and feel like, oh, this person's moving on in this way, or they have this thing that I don't have. And at the end, it's like, it's funny but really sad, because all they have is each other, but they're literally like in pieces, like they have metaphorically, gone to such extremes to try and preserve a very particular type of beauty, a very particular way of being in the world, that they have completely obliterated their actual humanity and the physicality of their actual humanity. And all they have is the mentality that preserves that perspective within each other, and there's a humor in the way that it's presented, and the tone of that humor, I think, is one that many of us rely on, because like I said, humor can be a really helpful tactic during heavy moments and during challenging life experiences, and especially things that are ongoing. But I also wonder, when we might decide to change those tides a bit, and maybe when it's time to put some of the protective mechanisms down and the humor down, and even, the criticism, because I think that criticism is, oftentimes avoiding the vulnerability of what you actually feel in this kind of context. And in this time when, you know, so many people are talking about the rigidity of body standards and beauty standards, and how those are often tools, you know, implemented and utilized by the patriarchy to put people in subservient positions by, you know, essentially making you like an enemy to yourself and making you afraid of yourself, afraid of your own mess, afraid of your own humanity, afraid that people will find you disgusting when you're not perfect, you know, and that you need to hide it and you need to get rid of it. It feels so prescient. Is that the right word? It feels so timely to say this right now, that there is another option. You know, I know that the internet is usually very reactive and tends to have conversations in this very like ping-ponging kind of black and white back and forth way, but real life is always in the gray areas, and it's okay if you feel afraid of getting older, and it's okay if you feel afraid of the unpredictability of life and afraid of the losses that you've already gone through and afraid of things that might come in the future. That doesn't make you a bad person, and it doesn't make you weak. It's very natural and very human. And I think that if we allowed ourselves and each other to be honest about that more, if we were more supportive of each other, actually being open about those things, I think that people would feel less inclined to hold on so tightly and feel like they needed to present themselves in a certain way in order to ensure their safety and acceptance by others. But that's always up to us, you know, like what kind of culture that we create alongside each other, what standards we hold ourselves to, because frankly, it's always going to be easy to judge someone. It's always going to be low effort, frankly, to say that person could have done this and they should have done that, and they're this and they're that for these reasons. But underneath it, you know, I think that most of us are kind of in the same boat, and I think that a lot of people need kindness in that right now, and they need gentleness, and they need a culture that allows them to access the intricacies and the complexities of what it really means to be a person who experiences the heartbreak that comes with being alive. Because life is beautiful, but it is brutal. And I just wish that we feel corny crying sometimes. It's not corny. I just wish that we would be there for each other more, instead of doing the easier thing and pointing fingers and being cruel, when I think we need the kindness a lot right now. So yeah, thanks for listening to me while I cried twice in this video. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know. What are you thinking about it? How are you making sense of it? And what's your relationship to grief around this stuff like? You know, is it too painful for you to look at? Or have you been waiting for somebody else to say, I also feel that way? And do you want to open those floodgates for yourself? Or I don't know. I think we can talk about these things more openly, you know? So feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll see you soon.